Now, I want to go through with you 3 scriptures. Let's go through them quickly. Here's the first one. John chapter 15 and verse 20. That's where Jesus said, if they have persecuted me, they will also persecute you. Pretty straightforward, right? What about 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 12? That's where the Apostle Paul said, all, did you get that word? All those desiring to live with godly devotion in association with Christ Jesus will also be persecuted. And how about Revelation chapter 2 and verse 10? It says, do not be afraid of the things that you're about to suffer. Look, the devil will keep on throwing some of you into prison. So the scriptures make it very, very clear that all of those who want to be servants of Jehovah are going to experience persecution. Well, as of this year, 2023, our work is either banned or restricted in 33 different lands. This affects the worship of hundreds of thousands of our brothers and sisters who are just like you and me, just ordinary people who want to serve God. And as of today's date, May 13, 2023, over 189 of our faithful brothers and sisters are imprisoned because of their faith. If you want to keep up to date with that, go to jw.org and go to the page Jehovah's Witnesses Imprisoned for Their Faith. Those figures are updated all the time.
We've been watching some opening comments from the concluding talk of the second day of this year's 2023 Exercise Patience Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. The speaker there is, of course, governing body member Mark Sanderson, who has the theme, When Persecuted, We Patiently Endure. Yes, this talk is all about persecution, as we've just heard. At practically every convention nowadays, there is some part of the program devoted almost entirely to discussing persecution and reminding Jehovah's Witnesses that they are being persecuted and of the reasons why they are being persecuted. And Mark Sanderson there briefly went through 3 Bible verses, which he interpreted to mean that it's inevitable that Jehovah's Witnesses will be persecuted because they are, after all, God's one and only true religion on the earth. They are true Christians. And look, to be clear, I feel like I have to say this every single time, and there are reasons why, trust me. To be clear, I feel it's wrong that Jehovah's Witnesses are persecuted by governments around the world for their faith. Interestingly, the number cited there by Mark Sanderson of over 189 has dropped slightly even since he gave this talk, which was just a few weeks ago. If you go to the page he's alluding to on jw.org, under the Global News section, Jehovah's Witnesses imprisoned for their faith by location. Jehovah's Witnesses imprisoned for their faith as of July 2023. It lists 4 countries by name, or four regions, you could say, one being Crimea, the other Eritrea, the other Russia, the other Singapore, and the other lands, in other words, other parts of the world that they can't name because Jehovah's Witnesses are banned in those areas. And for all of those regions, the number now is over 186. So the number has fallen ever so slightly, even in the few weeks since Mark Sanderson spoke these words. That alone should indicate how problematic it is to point to statistics on detention of Jehovah's Witnesses as evidence of how deep we are in the last days, or as evidence that Jehovah's Witnesses are conspicuous as God's one and only true religion. And to be super clear, I don't have a problem with Mark Sanderson reading these figures or drawing attention to the persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses, Because if he's not going to do it, who is? You know, any amount of persecution suffered by a religious minority is wrong. And of course, you know, the main outcry is going to come from the religious minority themselves. It's right that he, as a prominent figure within the Jehovah's Witness religion, is using his platform to talk about the mistreatment of his fellow believers. The problem I have always with the Jehovah's Witness approach to showing persecution or discussing persecution is, number one, the exploitative nature of it. And this becomes obvious as Mark Sanderson's talk unfolds. They are using persecution for propaganda value, have done for years now. They use the heartbreaking stories of a carefully curated small sample of Jehovah's Witnesses who've suffered, and they use their suffering and their pain to manipulate the broader population of Jehovah's Witnesses who are overwhelmingly not suffering, because 186 is a lot of people, but it's clearly not 8.5 million, is it? So the vast majority of Jehovah's Witnesses are not being persecuted. True, there are many, Mark Sanderson mentions hundreds of thousands. It's probably more like 200 or 300,000 Jehovah's Witnesses around the world who do live in countries where the work is under ban. But it's a little bit disingenuous because the organization encourages them to stay put. It doesn't say, right, we need to pull our people out of there. They even send Jehovah's Witnesses to countries like China, or encourage Jehovah's Witnesses to go to China where the preaching work is under ban so that they can preach anyway, at risk of being deported or at risk of falling foul of the local authorities. So it's not like they're taking a fully responsible approach when it comes to lessening the suffering of Jehovah's Witnesses. As far as they're concerned, the preaching work is more important than the individual suffering of Jehovah's Witnesses. So the exploitative nature of this content is one huge problem that I've always had. And the other problem I have is that they only ever talk about Jehovah's Witnesses. I think if you're putting yourself in their shoes, and if you're thinking, how would I deal with the matter of persecution if I were in a position of authority within a religious minority? I guess one thing I would be very careful to do is make it clear that we're not the only ones being persecuted, that there are lots of religious minorities being persecuted, and the persecution of people on grounds of their religion is wrong. It's a human rights violation, and therefore religious groups need to be working together to highlight each other's persecution so that authorities take more notice and do what they can to stop it from happening. And that's quite clearly not what's happening with Jehovah's Witnesses. So you take that figure of currently over 186 Jehovah's Witnesses imprisoned around the world for their faith. And just as one example, I'm going to read to you from a BBC article, Who Are the Uyghurs and Why is China Being Accused of Genocide? This was last updated on 24th of May, 2022. And there's a paragraph in that article which I think should be read. Analysis of data contained in the latest police documents called the Xinjiang Police Files showed that almost 23,000 residents or more than 12% of the adult population of one county, were in a camp or prison in the years 2017 and 2018. If applied to Xinjiang as a whole, the figures would mean the detention of more than 1.2 million Uyghur and other Turkic minority adults. 1.2 million detained in Xinjiang, according to an extrapolation in this BBC article. So again, just to be clear, it's wrong for there to be even one person detained on account of their faith. And I am personally appalled that around the world there are 186, over 186, who are currently imprisoned for the crime of being Jehovah's Witnesses, when really they're being exploited by an organization that isn't being held accountable. So it's the followers who are being made to suffer and not the leaders. But why can't there be a little bit of context? Why can't the likes of Mark Sanderson admit that Jehovah's Witnesses are by no means unique when it comes to the global scourge of religious persecution?